So something that's bothered me my entire career is that the largest supply companies give huge discounts to the large DSOs, while private dentists have to just pay more and more and more for things every single year. What's also bothered me is that there are some buying groups out there in dentistry that claim to save private dentists a bunch of money, but those buying groups are still utilizing the big companies that have been overcharging dentists the entire time. And those buying groups aren't necessarily giving dentists the low pricing that the DSOs still get. In comes a solution. A new sponsor of ours, I'm super excited to announce that the Private Dental Alliance is trying to solve this problem. Finally, someone's doing it, where private dentists only join their alliance and they get super low pricing on equipment, supplies, and lab fees, competing with the DSOs, putting them on a level playing field with the DSOs. If you want to understand how much money you would save, text the word savings to 48659. Savings to 48659. Do that right now, and you will be able to see very quickly a price comparison of what you're currently spending with whoever you're spending it with to what life would look like if you were in the alliance. Be a private dentist that takes advantage of this. Save a ton of money. Don't keep going month after month, losing money because you just haven't gone through the process of joining the alliance. That's Private Dental Alliance. Super excited. Finally, we can save some real money as private dentists. Have you ever wondered what the perfect way is to staff a young dental practice, a startup practice or practice that's just kind of getting off the ground? Maybe it's a slow practice you've purchased. We need to reset your expectations on what good staffing looks like. And that is exactly what we're going to be diving in our episode today on the Dental CEO Podcast. All right, to have this conversation, I think the best way to do it is to use the example of a startup practice. You know, a practice that starts from nothing, and as it grows, how do we keep expanding our employee base to the point where we're a mature practice? And maybe you're listening to this and you don't have a startup. You already have a practice that exists, but you're going to fall somewhere on that journey. Your practice today is going to be somewhere between brand new practice and super mature practice, right? So I think that understanding the healthy flow or expansion of employees and duties is very important, because you might find yourself out of balance right now. You might find yourself having too many employees over here, not enough over there, spending money here where it should be spent there, and so forth. So let's just have this conversation on staffing levels using the example of a brand new practice that will eventually become mature. So in a startup practice, brand new practice, when we open the doors, there's not a lot of patients. We have no recall patients, which in many practices, recall patients, that's like 3/4 of your patients you see, right? So all that's gone. So we're only left with a tiny patient flow, relatively speaking. And so in that tiny patient flow, we don't need a lot of staff, right? We would typically open a startup practice with one column in the schedule and one dental assistant and a dentist. And before I go to the front office, clinically, let's just focus clinically for a second. I know that the dentist could work out of 2 columns, right? But we're only going to have one column open in the schedule, because what that does is it forces all the patients to be booked in one column spread out throughout the whole day. If I were to book a dentist in 2 columns, we'd end up staggering patients. We'd be rushing between patients. We wouldn't do same-day dentistry. We might be running behind. I might feel compelled to add a second assistant. And I don't want that. I don't want to do, stagger dentistry for 3 hours and then have nothing else to do for the rest of the day. I would rather spread all those patients out in one column with one dental assistant I'm employing, and I'd be able to stay on time, convert same-day dentistry, reduce the stress. So clinically in the beginning, we have one dental assistant in one column. On the front office side, we got a real problem because, whether we're a brand new practice or mature practice, we might have 3 or 4 phone calls coming at once. So does that mean we need 3 or 4 employees in the front office? We can't afford that, right? We have these waves of workload, but we can't afford to like staff up to the height of that wave. So in a startup, what we typically would do is we would have only one front office person, but we would utilize a virtual assistant as well. So my one front office person is going to work, the hours we're seeing patients plus other hours that week. And my virtual person is going to overlap in hours with my on-site person in a way that we're covering the highest volumes of phone calls. I got to unpack that for a bit. I talked about a few things there. So number one, my front office person, they're going to work the days we're open. Maybe it's 3 days a week. But they're also going to work the other days they need to work, right? It's hard to find and hire someone really good for a startup that's willing to only work 3 days a week. Usually the best people, they want to land and have a full-time role somewhere. And so in a startup practice, we don't have enough patients to be full-time yet. But we've got employees that need full-time hours. So we are going to have the employees work full-time. And even though you might look at that as like, oh, well, now we're spending more money than we could, I'm looking at that as like, that's why I have working capital. I need someone that is a long-term ideal player in my company. In the short term, we don't have clinical care for all those hours, but in the long term, we will. I'm going to pay them to work full-time. We're going to see patients 3 days a week, but the other, let's call it a day a week, they are going to be doing administrative tasks and covering phones, covering walk-ins, and anything else I can give them that will help me with patient flow. All right, so that's what the front office person on site is working, one front office person. Now we're going to get a virtual assistant, and we want that virtual assistant to also work full-time. Luckily, it only costs us like $11 an hour to get a virtual assistant in dentistry. So it's not a super expensive thing for us. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the phone calls, and I am going to make sure that the virtual assistant is covering the spikes in calls, which might mean that my virtual assistant, like there in a lot of offices, there's a spike in phone calls in the middle of the day around lunch, as well as towards the end of the afternoon. Usually we don't have this huge spike in the morning, although maybe you do, but most offices, it's around lunch and in the afternoon. So I might have my virtual assistant work like 10 a.m. until 7 p.m. Yet my practice is seeing patients 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. maybe. I'm just coming up with something, but you could see how my on-site person might be working 8 to 4, and my virtual person is overlapping with them and working from 10 to 7. That gives us the strength and phone coverage we need for a startup practice. Now, that virtual person, by the way, they're not just answering phones. They're verifying insurance and confirming appointments, and they happen to answer the call that we miss. Right? Their primary role is doing other very productive things all day long. I don't want them sitting there waiting for a call. I want them working. So they're going to do other things. They're almost like my front office person's assistant, right? My front office person is going to do the most important things on site in front of patients, and my front office person is going to kind of offload or outsource the other things to this virtual assistant. So this virtual assistant is doing these confirmations or processing OBs or confirming appointments. And in the middle of those tasks, if my practice misses a phone call, my virtual assistant is able to answer it. And then we've kind of got this safety net now, so we're not losing so much opportunity. We're not losing the new patient flow we could have had. All right, so that's the initial setup for the startup. You notice there's no hygienist in a startup, not in the beginning. We're open 3 days a week. We've got this set up with one dental assistant, one front office person, and a virtual assistant. Then we grow and we get booked out, a week. Now we're booked out 2 weeks, and when we're booked out 2 weeks, we got a problem. When you're booked out 2 weeks or more, your no-show rates uptick, your cancellation rates uptick, your conversion on the phone goes down. These are all horrible things. And so as we're approaching getting booked out 2 weeks, we need to expand. And so we are going to open up that second column now in the schedule, run staggered schedule, and we are going to hire a second dental assistant. Now that's created openings. Now we're not booked out 2 weeks. We won't need any more in the front. Not yet. Okay. So now we've got 2 columns going, and we decide, you know what? We want to quit our part-time associateship. We want to work full-time in our startup. We're going to finally add that 4th day we intend to work, or that 4th and 5th and a half day, or whatever it is. We're going to expand our startup to the ideal schedule that we always intended it to be, with our current team, 2 dental assistants and 1 front office person and this virtual assistant. And so when we expand it, we open up Thursdays or we open up Fridays. Now we've created more openings. We're not booked out anymore, right? So we keep that same team, and we keep on doing dentistry, and we keep on growing, and we're still doing our own hygiene. And we keep doing that until we're booked out, right? Until we really are booked out almost 2 weeks. And that becomes the moment we get to add our first hygienist. And when we add that hygienist, likely going to be a part-time hygienist, and maybe, hopefully, you are running an assisted hygiene model, because that's a smarter model for your practice. And that hygienist is going to basically pull all the hygiene off the doctor's schedule to create openings. And we're going to put all the hygiene we can on the hygienist schedule, but if the hygienist is booked, we're still going to put hygiene on the doctor's schedule, right? We're not going to make people wait and get booked out when my doctor has got an opening. So the doc's still doing some hygiene, but less. And we run that until we're booked out, and we keep expanding hygiene. And at kind of maturity, what I might end up with here is a doctor working out of 2 columns with 2 dental assistants. And I might end up with 3 hygienists sharing 3 ops. Excuse me. No, let me say that again. Rewind. Got that wrong. Rewind. What I'll end up with at maturity is a doctor using 2 columns with 2 different dental assistants. Then I might have 3 other columns in a 5-op practice. And those 3 other columns are hygiene columns, and they can be covered by 2 or 3 hygienists, depending on if I'm running assisted hygiene or not. And in the front office, to handle 5 columns of volume at peak capacity, my front office will have 2 on-site people plus a virtual person. And those 2 on-site people would likely be, the roles will probably be split up into kind of a scheduler receptionist person and a insurance and treatment coordinator person. So one person handling most of the calls and welcoming patients in, and then one person handling most of the billing and insurance tasks, with my virtual person being the safety net on phones and doing the verifications and confirmations and the EOB processing, those more kind of monotonous tasks being done by the virtual person. So that is a wonderful ratio. You could do 2 million in collections with 1 doctor. You could take home half of that in a 5-op practice where we've got 2 columns to the doctor, 3 columns to hygiene. We've got maybe 2 hygienists, a hygiene assistant, 2 dental assistants, and then 2 front office people, 7 employees, right? Plus the doctor, plus a virtual person. Now, we can go bigger than that, right? We could have a 7-op practice with 1 doctor. Maybe you're one of those doctors. You're one of those docs that covers 3 columns, and you have 4 columns of hygiene supporting you, and you are running around like crazy. Maybe you could be one of those doctors. And obviously, if you're one of those doctors, there comes a point where you're going to need yet another front office person or another virtual assistant. But I think this kind of solid, high profit, well-functioning ratio says 1 doctor basically has 5 operatories of support. 2 of them are doctor ops, 3 are hygiene. And those hygiene ops are covered by 2 hygienists. And we got 3 assistants helping us with this setup, 2 front office people with a virtual assistant. And that is kind of at maturity what this looks like. Now, if you have 2 doctors working at the same time, so they're not overlapping some, they're literally working the exact same schedule every week, then you are going to need at full capacity at least 10 ops, because each doctor needs the 5 full ops of support, 3 hygiene ops to fuel their schedule, and 2 restorative ops to do the dentistry. Each doctor needs that. And if you screw that up, if you don't have 10, then what you're doing is you're basically cannibalizing each doctor's patient base, or you're not giving them enough fuel. And so you're going to be kind of operating at this like lower flow state of production, because you're going to be susceptible to ups and downs during the year. It's going to be difficult. It's going to always feel like you're just kind of behind filling your doctor. They're never quite full enough is how it can feel with a typical doctor that diagnoses typical dentistry with typical case acceptance. You really need full 5 ops to support each doctor. So again, if 2 doctors are working at the exact same time, you're going to need 10 ops in that facility. What if you don't have 10 ops, but you want 2 doctors working? Well, that's when you're going to go to some sort of extended hour setup or some overlapping where, for example, just for an extreme example, let's say I've only got 5 ops and I want 2 doctors. Wow, how do we make that happen? Well, I could be open 7 to 7. And one doc could work 2.5 days a week, and the other doc could work the other 2.5 days a week, right? And 7 to 7, 2.5 days a week, that's 30 hours a week. That might be how I get 2 doctors working 30 hours a week with 5 full ops of support when they're there. If I have more than 5 ops, if I have 7 ops, then I could overlap them a little bit. So maybe one doctor, and we don't have to maybe be open from 7 to 7. We might be open 8 to 5. And one doctor might work like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the other doctor might work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, right? So some days they're the sole doctor there and they're covering a bigger load of hygiene. And other days both doctors are there and they're each covering a smaller load of hygiene. But when you add up during the week, the ops of hygiene they're covering and the ops they get, it needs to come out to this ratio where in any given day, on average, there's 5 full ops of support for that doctor. So if a doctor works 4 days a week and they need 3 columns of hygiene to fuel their schedule, that means that 4 times the 3 columns they need 12 columns for the week. Maybe they have more columns on Monday and less columns on Tuesday, but it needs to add up to 12 in this particular example. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. So, we got to have the full support. We need enough hygiene columns to support that doctor in filling their schedule. And when it comes now to staffing, it can get a little hairy when you're running multiple doctors in some sort of slightly overlap schedule, because on some days of the week, you're going to need more dental assistants. On other days, you're going to need less. And so obviously with the second doctor or third doctor, now you're adding a whole nother level of complexity to how you manage your team schedule. Similarly, if you're running extended hours, that adds a level of complexity. Back to that first example, Monday through Friday, 7 to 7, 2 doctors. In just 5 ops. I have the doctors working 2.5 days a week, but what if your employees need to work 3 full days a week to get their hours in? So it starts getting complicated. You have an employee work Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. You have another one work Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. You have another one work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And so it takes these 3, potentially assistants to get 2 doctor columns covered in this example. It starts just getting complicated. But that's the way it is. Parts of running a dental practice get complicated. If you're a solo dentist with a normal schedule, then you're not going to have anything but just normal complexity. But if you are starting to have advanced scheduling and 2 doctors or extended hours, overlapping or not overlapping, some days are different than other days, you are going to need advanced staff schedule management. And that's just what you're signing up for. But don't get lost in that complexity and in that chaos and screw up not having enough support columns per doctor. You gotta have enough support columns per doctor. And if you don't have enough patience for that, then you're not ready for that next doctor. that you want to make sure that everyone's always successful. So You need to have the right balance, the right ratio. All of this started on day one of opening the practice with just one dental assistant, just one front office person, and a virtual assistant. But at peak capacity, every doctor needs 5 ops of coverage, 2 restorative ops with 2 dental assistants, 3 hygiene ops with either 3 unassisted hygienists or 2 hygienists where one of them's assisted, and 2 front office people plus virtual support per doctor at peak capacity. And that can get you, with only one doctor, 5 ops, at least 2 million collections, at least $1 million take-home pay for that owner dentist working that schedule. And I hope that this kind of gets you thinking. Now, look at what your ratio is. Do the math. Get done with this episode and go do the math. How many hygiene columns are supporting your schedule or your associate's schedule? Is it enough? Is it 3 columns per day? Add it up for the week. If it's not, we got an issue. How many front office people do you have? Do you have more than 2 per doctor? Chances are you're overstaffed, but it doesn't feel that way. You're overstaffed, but everyone looks busy and seems busy and doesn't seem to be able to ever get everything done perfectly. Well, they got used to that. And they may not have the organization or the training or the direction. You need 2 front office people and a virtual assistant per doctor. If you've got more than that, then you've got some ineffectiveness somewhere happening. All right, that is the end of our episode on staffing. I hope this, again, made your wheels start turning. Do some math. Maybe you need a reset. This really is a big deal for a bunch of dentists, so I hope this was a good episode for me to record for you guys. Until next time, my name's Scott Leune, and this was the Dental CEO Podcast.